A very busy week for most people. Over the last few days, we've seen high-profile individuals being sent behind bars and spending nights there. Most of these have been because of what they said, as this was a risk to the country's security, but also to the country's peace. These are unfolding cases, and we will continue updating you on what results. But there's more arrests happening, and these arrests are based on accusations of what is believed to have been done, what is believed to have been taken from the people. That's what we talk about on tonight's edition of This Day. It coincides with the release of the report that indicates an improvement in Zambia's fight against corruption from Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. I'll be joined tonight by the Chapter President of Transparency International Zambia. My name is Dingindaba Jonah Ioya, and welcome to This Day. To start the program, let's take a look at one of the day's biggest news stories, a highlight of former First Lady Esther Lungu being arrested alongside her daughter and another person. This was after they were called by the Drug Enforcement Commission for interrogation that has this evening resulted in the arrest of the three of them. Those that were invited were four, but one of them unavailable. And I'll run you through the sequence of events. Who are these people involved in these allegations and the arrests? Let's start off with the daughter, TIZ Lungu. It's not the first time that she's making news. The first time was when she was admitted to the bar as a lawyer. The other time was when she was involved in a corruption allegation case. The state managed to get the property that belonged to her, which she has since appealed. In a landmark legal development, a panel of 3 economic and financial crimes court judges delivered a judgment in favor of the Director of Public Prosecutions, resulting in the forfeiture of properties belonging to TIZ Lungu, the daughter of the former President Edgar Lungu. The case centered on allegations that the property that she acquired was illicit property acquisition, and it unfolded with careful legal arguments from both sides. The Director of Public Prosecutions argued that the properties that she owned were suspected to be proceeds of crime, valued at over 9 million kwacha, and this was in Lusaka's state lodge. TIZ Lungu, daughter of the former president, a legal practitioner herself, as I stated, argued that she obtained these properties legitimately from money given to her by her parents, Edgar and Esther Lungu. During these proceedings, TIZ Lungu emphasized that there was absolutely nothing wrong. There was no law that was barring ownership of property exceeding the known income levels of an individual. But the court contended that the evidence that was presented before the court, focusing on the crucial question on whether TIZ could substantiate her claim of legitimate acquisition, the DPP highlighted that there was a significant value disparity between the properties that she owned and TIZ's known income sources. This was raising reasonable suspicion, I should add. And therefore, the court stated, and I will quote verbatim what they said, "From our analysis of the evidence before us, we find that the interested party has not provided evidence that the money used to procure and or develop the properties was given to her by her parents." This court basically highlighted the whole of the court's reasoning, emphasizing that there was a need for her to substantiate proof or validate the ownership claims, especially in cases involving suspected criminal proceeds. Now, this judgment, a lot of scholars have argued, underscored the importance of meeting evidential burdens to establish legitimate property ownership. The National Prosecution Authority and their website acknowledged this, stating that TIZ Lungu was also condemned in costs, highlighting the legal repercussions of failing to substantiate claims adequately. The decision is a significant precedent I must add, in legal proceedings involving property forfeiture, emphasizing the stringent evidential standards that are required to establish legitimate ownership and defend against suspicions of criminal origins. She argues that this position is not true and has since appealed this decision. That's as much as we know about her, apart from the fact that today she joins her mother in this arrest. But in 2023, the former First Lady Esther Lungu was once again arrested. It's not the first time that she's facing this kind of situation. At the time, she was charged with theft, as there was an accusation that she had stolen a motor vehicle alongside other individuals. But on her own accord, she was also still subject to investigations and was appearing before court based on a charge of owning property that is reasonably suspected to be proceeds of crime. Prior to this arrest, Mrs. Lungu had appeared at a local police station. She was accompanied by members of the Patriotic Front, a political party that left office, which made her husband president and subsequently made her First Lady of the country. It is during her period as First Lady and her husband's tenure as president under which there is a suspicion that she was involved in corruption and had property that was proceeds of crime. It is today what the state argues should be accounted for. Opposition members of parliament argue that these allegations are bogus and the state is using the former First Lady to get to her husband, the former president, because of his decision to come back to active politics. They argue that this is a political fight orchestrated by the ruling party, a decision to ensure that they keep the former president and his family under pressure and possibly deter them from any resurface on the political scene. The state has vehemently argued, the president saying that the different arms of government are independent of each other and the judiciary is not any different. Earlier this month, you may recall Mrs. Lungu saying that her and her family did not steal anything, and she pleaded for the country to offer them support, stating that they would be vindicated based on investigations and considering the fact that they had not done anything wrong. Again, she stands charged for owning property reasonably suspected to be proceeds of crime, and this prompted her statement at the time. Now today, she has once again been arrested for being in possession of property reasonably suspected to be proceeds of crime. This time around, it is also her daughter Chieso and another suspect whose details we're still searching. What we know so far, however, is that his name is one Charles Piri. There are 3 people that have been arrested and 1 missing from this list. This is because the Drug Enforcement Commission initially invited 4 people, including former President Edgar Lungu's daughter, Tasila, who is believed to be out of the country and was not present today. Now, this is not the first time that a former First Lady is being arrested. Under the Patriotic Front leadership, shortly after taking over office from the MMD government, former First Lady Tandiwe Banda faced a similar scenario. Her flats, regarded as the Mpundu Trust flats, put her in trouble. They were seized by the ACC and she had to stand trial, which she ultimately was vindicated for. They accused her of owning this property that was reasonably suspected to be proceeds of crime. Precedence in this case, I guess, has continued, with the former First Lady Esther Lungu being another of the First Ladies that has been arrested to account for property that she owns. This case continues, and we will give you more details on this as we continue on Diamond TV. But on this edition of This Day, we evaluate the country's performance in the fight against corruption, because Transparency International has scored Zambia 37, the first time an improvement in 10 years, now ranking the country 98th in the world. I sat down with the president of Transparency International Zambia chapter. I asked her if this fight against corruption is legitimate, why it is important, and how we can strengthen the fight. And this is what we talked about. Priscilla, Transparency International Zambia President, thank you so much for talking to me on this edition of This Day. Let's start off with Zambia's Corruption Perception Index score. The CPI score, as you call it, it has improved and the ranking has also improved. The index has increased for Zambia from 33 to 37. The ranking is now 98th globally in terms of corruption. This is the first time in 10 years that our country has improved its CPI score. And so I want to find out from you what you think has led to this improvement.
I think from our own local assessment, what has led to the improvement in the CPI score has been basically the improvements that we've seen. For example, the establishment of the Economic and Financial Crimes Court, the proliferation of the integrity mechanisms, basically the establishment of the integrity committees and their efficacy in the various institutions where they've been established. Also, we've seen improvement in availability of service charters, enactment of gift policies, and generally there's been a reduction in political corruption as well. There's been a minimal reduction in that area.
You've probably heard, but there's a lot of stakeholders that are questioning the credibility of the Corruption Perception Index, stating that corruption has actually worsened. How do you reconcile these two positions?
Well, our stakeholders are entitled to their own opinion. Transparency International has been making these assessments from various credible sources. So it's not like Transparency International does the research itself. And remember, these are perceptions of the public sector corruption. So really, the assessment that has been done is something that is done annually by Transparency International. And we always stand by our report. You will notice that if the report was going to be bad, there were some sectors that were going to be able to say, yes, that's the correct position. That's what we expect. We don't expect everyone to agree by our report, but what we're saying is this is the report and these are the findings.
The President of Zambia, President HH, has committed to fighting past, present and future corruption. However, there is a perception that this commitment is not being followed, and this is by some of his critics. What has been your observation as Transparency International Zambia in this regard?
I think it would be important, especially for the government, to ensure that wherever there are allegations of corruption, I think people need to be investigated, whether you're holding public office or not, especially for people that are holding public offices. As you are aware, it's only the Republican president who's got immunity, who enjoys immunity. So in terms of ministers, permanent secretaries, if there are allegations of corruption by members that are serving in the current administration, we would urge the law enforcement agencies to take an interest, investigate, and prosecute. I think it's very important, as it will send a correct message that even if you are serving in government, you're entrusted, to hold office by the Zambian people. You still have to remain accountable. Of course, this is a trend that always seems to be worrying. I don't think it's just with this current government, because even previously, you always seem to see that when people leave office, that's when we see our law enforcement agencies a bit more active with a former cabinet ministers, people that served in government. But what we're saying is we want those things to be done now. Let them be investigated while they're still in office. They'll be given an opportunity at court to defend their matter. So I think it's not a question about focusing on the past. We need to focus even on the current. And I think it's very important so that the resources of the country are safeguarded, because you're talking about people that are managing public resources. So it will send an important message to any office bearer that even if you're serving in government, you can be investigated, you can be arrested, and you can be prosecuted, hopefully convicted as well.
Do you think there's been enough transparency from investigative wings in handling some of these corruption cases?
When you speak about the element of transparency, one thing that we've noticed is there are certain cases where the law enforcement agencies publicly provide information. And there are other instances where we don't seem to have enough information in terms of what is happening. I think what we'd like to see is some form of uniformity. Is this a matter of public interest? If it is, provide the information. How are you handling the matter? Where are we? You know, if you decide to enter into the non-conviction based forfeiture, it will be interesting to see what are the terms. I think it's important to have this form of uniformity. Of course, even when you talk about transparency, there are certain matters where the investigative wings might feel that probably it's in the public interest or an issue to do with security. That's why they don't want the information to be in the public domain. But generally, we expect the public to have a lot of information in terms of how these investigations are going, as long as they don't jeopardize the matter itself.
Let's talk about one of the most talked about issues in the fight against corruption, non-conviction based forfeiture. What is TIZ's considered view of this situation?
I think TIZ has always been, our view has always been that the dual process, that is, as much as there's the non-conviction based forfeiture, we should also endeavor to have these matters prosecuted. I think it's very important that we use all the legal mechanisms in place. We are cognizant of the fact that the non-conviction based forfeiture is provided for law by our own laws. We are also aware that even prosecution is provided for by our laws. So as TIZ, what we're saying is we would like to see a situation where the element of forfeiture and the element of prosecution go hand in hand. I don't think we should have a situation where one mode, of sanction is preferred to the other. Because at the end of the day, you want to create an atmosphere which promotes zero tolerance to corruption. And one of the things that you realize that, I'll give you an example. If someone is prosecuted and the same person, their assets are forfeited, the chances that the people that are aware of this situation or the public that read about this would try to engage into a corrupt, act becomes less. You see, so there's some form of deterrence, and that's what we want to encourage. So from TIZ position, we're saying, yes, there's this element of forfeiture, but we're also saying, yes, in addition to forfeiture, can we ensure that we prosecute? Because remember, as we are prosecuting, we're not guaranteed of conviction, because conviction really is determined by so many factors that are beyond the prosecutors themselves. So I think it's very important that we use all the tools available under our laws to discourage people from engaging in corrupt activities. People need to know that it doesn't pay to be corrupt. And I think that's the message that we've always sent, and that's the message that we're sending, that we want these two processes actually to go hand in hand.
All right, let's talk about the convictions themselves. There's been a concern that most cases don't even end up in convictions. Instead, the people that are accused are discharged, or the state enters into deals, or the state enters into a nolle prosequi. Do you think that investigative wings are well equipped and efficient in conducting their investigations?
Well, about investigative officers being well equipped, I think it could be a topic of debate. But our considered view is we need more investment in investigations, whether it's in terms of technology, whether it's in terms of manpower, whether it's in terms of capacity generally. Because as you are aware, corruption is very sophisticated. And most of these acts of corruption are done from different jurisdictions. You'll find that people enter into corrupt deals. This is a person in Zambia entering into a corrupt deal with another person or a company, which is not ordinarily resident in Zambia. So even in terms of your skills, in terms of investigations, you really have to invest much more than we currently have. I think those are some of the challenges that the government has to look into. Have we invested adequately in terms of technology? Do we have the up to speed technology to be able to dictate, to be able to actually see where this money is going to? Of course, we've got these mutual legal assistance arrangements with different countries, but it's not all the countries that we have those kind of arrangements with. So in terms of equipment, we still feel more has to be done in that area if we have to fight this corruption to the level that we want. If you remember, initially we were talking about our score as Zambia, really, from 33 to 37. We're still below 50 because you're talking about a score of 100. And 50 is the median. So in terms of the fight against corruption, there's a lot of work that we need to do. Institutional, policy, legal reforms, because you have to have a holistic approach in the fight against corruption.
I recently interviewed the Director General of the Drug Enforcement Commission, and he said that sending corrupt individuals to prison is far from expensive as an undertaking as compared to asset recovery. Do you agree with the statement that he made on this show that you're appearing on today?
Fighting corruption is a very expensive venture. The issue that we need to address is that enough deterrence? Because at the end of the day, you want to create a culture of zero tolerance to corruption. Is it adequate for someone to just pay back and walk away? A crime is a crime. And I think at the end of the day, we have to create a society where people realize that it doesn't pay to be corrupt. When you talk about expense, look at the effect of what corruption has on our economy. So I think from our end, really, the element of prosecution has to be taken into account. And I think if prosecution are effectively done, they're more sustainable in terms of the fact that there's a way in which a message is sent to the public. There's a certain level of deterrence that it creates in the community. So yes, it can seem as if going to court is very expensive, but in terms of the effect and the impact on society, I think it's got a better impact in terms of deterrence. So I think it's something that has to be looked at. It's not a question of something being convenient. It's a question of ensuring that people are deterred from engaging in corrupt acts.
Let's move towards financial crimes. The Drug Enforcement Commission previously forfeited over 800 million kwacha from various cases. What does this say about the fight against financial crimes in Zambia?
Well, firstly, it does indicate that there's a lot of money that the corrupt have amassed, because if you look at the time frame and the amount that has been recovered, it tells you that there's a lot more going on and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So in terms of the financial crimes, I think as a country, I know we've got our Financial Intelligence Center, but we also need to enhance our systems. And I think FINC has been doing quite a lot in that regard. So we hope to see more recoveries, because even when you look at the misappropriation of monies, whether it's under the Auditor General's report, you'll be able to see the trend and you get to realize that corruption has contributed to the economic situation that this country is in. So a lot of effort has to be put into that. And I think the Drug Enforcement Commission must not relent. I think it's very important to ensure that resources that were taken, they're taken back to the public again.
As you may be aware, the president passed a law that's mandating the court cases being heard and concluded within 5 months. And there is a concern that this will negatively impact the outcome of cases and the fight against corruption itself. What is your assessment as Transparency International Zambia on this issue?
Of course, those are the current rules now in the Economic and Financial Crimes Court. So all corruption matters will be dealt within 5 months. And I think probably what you're interested in knowing is, are we going as a country to achieve the desired result? Because the desired result is really ensuring that their allegations, people are tried, and we have some convictions. So when you're talking about the 5 months, it's really the 5 months when the matter starts. So I think from our end as Transparency International, it will be important to also be able to review how these 5 months work. Of course, this justice delayed is justice denied. So it's very important that even people that are accused are given a fair trial. But I think what will be more important is for our law enforcement agencies to ensure that before they even effect an arrest, they've done their investigations thoroughly. Because it won't make sense. You take someone to court, 5 months, they are acquitted. What are you doing? The whole idea is to have a speedy recovery, a speedy trial to ensure that the evidence is available, it's not distorted, witnesses are available, and when the matter is taken to court, it's able to be concluded within 5 months. I think this gets to help to ensure that cases of corruption don't paint for a long time. But whether we as a country will be able to achieve the intended results will be yet to be seen. Because as you are aware, the Economic and Financial Crimes just became the rules pertaining to the 5 months process of the court proceedings were just recently implemented. So we want to see, are we going to achieve the intended purpose? I think for us, that's very important. If not, then it will be important to review the mechanisms, because at the end of the day, you want everyone to be given an opportunity to defend themselves, but you also want the state to prove its case against these allegations of corruption. So I think it would be very, very important to ensure that these 5 months for court proceedings, it will be important to evaluate them, see how the performance is, see whether or not as a country we are making strides in the fight against corruption in relation to the prosecutions.
On top of this that we've talked about, the ACC also introduced a whistleblower platform for reporting suspected corruption. Objectively speaking, how do you think this will aid in the fight against corruption, and if it's useful at all?
I think one of the elements that the anonymous whistleblower that the ACC has introduced, I think it's an element of anonymity. I think the more often than not, there are people amongst ourselves who are aware of corrupt acts that are being done, but they don't feel comfortable coming forward to be able to disclose. So we hope to see more reports, more whistleblowing in terms of anti-corruption, in terms of corrupt activities, and we also hope to see more prosecutions. Because if you have an increment in the reports and they're investigated, then we hope to see more prosecutions and we hope to see more convictions resulting from that. So we're looking forward, and I think it will really help the fight against corruption because of that element. You can have a boss who's corrupt, and sometimes you're not comfortable because you don't want to come out in the open, but you've got this information before you. You will be able to pass it on to the SEC without them knowing who you are, as long as you ensure that the information that you're passing on is something that they can investigate and find on the ground. So we hope to really see the public utilize that platform. I think it's very important because even amongst our community, and I think this is something that I want to talk about, corruption, the fight against corruption should not be left to the state or to institutions alone. We live in communities, we live with family members who don't do anything, but they could be affiliated or associated to someone who's in a position of authority. Then you just see them building houses, acquiring plots. Surely you must be able to question, because this person doesn't have any known source of income apart from their affiliation with someone who's in a position of authority. So I think it would be important for the public generally to also utilize this platform. The fight against corruption involves each and every one of us. And I think there's no better opportunity for each one of us to utilize that platform. I mean, if there are allegations of a minister being involved in a corrupt act, you've got that platform by the SEC, send the information. I think that would be very, very important in the fight against corruption. And we hope every one of us will utilize it. Of course, there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of sensitization, especially with our local communities. Because when people have information, people are able to use that information.
Do you think that members of the public have confidence in the investigative wings, given that some people feel corruption is not being effectively fought?
I think members of the public have to do their part. And I think this is where the media comes in. I'm sure you've observed that if a member of the public reported something, it was not worked on, the moment it goes to the media and it comes into public domain, everyone involved takes an interest. I think it's very important that we don't lose faith in our institutions that are established by law. I think it's very important that we demand accountability from the law enforcement agencies. You see, my obligation to report ends there. It's up to the law enforcement agencies to ensure that they investigate. If they don't investigate, I must demand to know why aren't you investigating? And if I'm not happy with the response, I should be able to come to the media to say, can you please look into this? This is the information that I have. This is the minister who's doing this. I reported this matter, and the law enforcement agencies didn't do enough. Remember, it is our responsibility as a people. This is our country. So the issue of corruption affects each and every one of us. So you must be able to demand from the law enforcement agencies, why aren't they investigating your complaint? Why aren't they investigating your allegations? It is their job. It is their duty. So it's not like they're doing you a favor. They're just doing their job that they are paid to do.
You, as Transparency International Zambia, have been calling for the legalization of political party financing, finding a way in which we know how these political parties are being financed and financing them to an extent. What has made you go this route, and are political parties in support of it?
Well, if one thing that you realize about political party financing is you sometimes get people that finance political parties with the hope that when the party gets into government, then they'll be able to get some benefits, whether in terms of tenders, you know. So generally what you see is when a political party has been getting financing from sources, because generally there's no legislation in the country. Yes, the constitution provides for that, but there's been no enactment of the political party financing law. And what we're saying is this is very important to manage transparency and accountability. Remember, a political party is what forms a government. So if this political party, where it's coming from, already had arrangements with people, probably there are some people that were financing them, they get into power, then they start making laws that favor that particular business. They're not doing it in the interest of the public. They're doing it in the interest of private parties. And what we're saying is we want to know where your money is coming from, who is giving you that money. It gets to help you on the other side when you cross over, for us to see, are you doing things to pay back your financiers? Because this is what ends up where you have state capture. And those are the things that you want to avoid as a country. A lot of research has been done in terms of political party financing. So it's just not an issue of who gives you the money. How much money is the political party being given? What are the thresholds? Where is this money coming from? I think those are important elements that need to be looked into and legislated. But also it gets to help all the political parties. I'm sure you saw what happened in the last elections where political parties went all out. And the question was, where was this money coming from? You know, is it genuine sources of monies? Because these are the things that start affecting your procurement as a country. The people, for instance, I'll give you an example of single sourcing. If someone spent $50 million on your campaign, this is a company. You get into power, they've got an expectation that you'll be able to give them deals to that amount. Whether they can deliver or they're the best people to do that deal is another issue. Okay, so from the onset, the interest is no longer that of the public. It's just for those private citizens. So in terms of political party financing, we want to know the source. We want a level of transparency and accountability to avoid the elements of state capture. I think that's very, very important. When the political parties are, our TIZ had engaged political parties. And of course, we are yet to see what will happen when the legislation is put in place. But it's in everyone's interest to ensure that there's transparency and accountability in how political parties are funded and their sources of financing. I think that is very critical. It's very critical so that as a country, you avoid state capture, because these are things that have happened in different countries.
Speaking about state capture, do you think this is happening in Zambia?
Well, there have been allegations of that.
How serious is this state capture, and should citizens be worried when it happens?
Well, I think for us, we've just heard allegations and we haven't had anything substantiated. I think we saw it in one of our countries in the SADC when this issue arose, and what impact it had on the running of government, the running of ministries, the running of institutions, and the effect it has on resources available to the general public. You know, you find a situation where it's specific individuals that are benefiting at the expense of the general masses. But you see, those are the effects of corruptions. And I think these are some of the issues why people say, can we have transparency? Can we have accountability? You know, when you're entrusted in a position of authority, that position comes with responsibility. And with responsibility comes obligations. And what we're saying is, can you please be transparent in your deal so that we are able to see, are these things being done for the benefit of the public, or is it for the benefit of a few individuals? So those are things that have to be continuously, checked. I think it's always important to hold to account people that hold public office. They hold a lot of power. They manage a lot of public resources. It's just important that they are accountable to the people. I think that is very critical.
The Patriotic Front has raised allegations that the current fight against corruption is merely a political witch hunt, and you have been assessing this situation as TIZ. What do you think about that?
I think it's important from the onset to state that where there are allegations of corruption, they must be investigated. And the fight against corruption should not be used as a political tool to persecute those in opposition or those that do not agree with the government of the day. I think it's very important, and probably because I'm sure you remember that even during the time of the Patriotic Front in government, there were concerns and allegations about corruptions that were made against them. And probably this is a call to the UPND that these things that are happening to the PF, people need to ensure that they are conducting the affairs of this country above board. I think there's also a tendency by political parties, especially the governing political parties, when they leave power, you always find that the law enforcement agencies, this is the time that they go to actually start investigating them, arresting them, and subsequently prosecuting them. And I think earlier I had alluded to the fact that we need to see a change in that style. I think what we want to see is if there are allegations against someone who's serving in government, please proceed with the investigations, proceed with the arrest, proceed with the prosecution, so that this perception or these allegations should not be substantiated. I think it's very important that people are seen to be doing their work fairly. I think it's very, very important. And I think probably to the UPND, the government in power, this is a timely call to them to ensure that they conduct the affairs of this country above board. And we're calling upon the law enforcement agencies. Please do not wait for people in these public offices to leave their public offices. That's when you start investigating them. I think it's important that you do that while they're serving. So these allegations of where now we start having issues to do with political persecutions, they don't come to the fore. I think from our end is we must ensure there's professionalism. If there are allegations and there's evidence to support that, whether you're in government, former government, you're a private citizen, the law must take its course. It should never be about your status, specifically your political status, that should determine whether or not you're corrupt. I think when there are allegations of corruption, let's just investigate it and deal with it professionally. That way, it will also enhance the credibility in the fight against corruption.
What is your position on those serving in government who are being investigated? The argument has been about the presumption of innocence until proven otherwise. Should they resign while being investigated?
I think one thing you will realize is if there are allegations, for example, against a sitting minister in relation to a transaction that was in their own ministry, I think it's just prudent and reasonable for a person to pave way so that the investigative wings can do their job properly. I think we don't want this perception created where someone is holding this authority and there's a possibility that they can interfere with the evidence. So I think the issue with the call for you to resign or to step aside to pave way for investigation is also to protect you from allegations of interference with the investigations. If you are innocent, the courts of law, you have your day at court and you'll be able actually to prove your innocence. We've had matters where people have been acquitted. What we just don't want to see is a situation where someone can interfere or influence the investigations because they're in a position of authority. So those are the concerns, and they're genuine and they're well-founded.
Now, we see a trend of law enforcement agencies getting busy following up on a party that has left office. Is Transparency International Zambia seeing enough political will from the current administration in the fight against corruption and ensuring the full independence of law enforcement agencies?
Yes, we've seen there's been political will. Is it enough? I think what we're saying is we want to see more. We want to see more in action. Yes, it's a concern, and I think the law enforcement agencies, because sometimes it's an issue of perception. How have they been doing things in the past? So they sometimes get to think, and sometimes there's this perception that is created of interference. Whether interference is there or not, it's a question of fact. And it's for the law enforcement agencies to actually address that issue. But what we're saying is, Yes, we've seen a certain level of political will. We've seen there's been an increment to the budget allocation. We've seen there's an enactment of the Access Information Bill. Of course, we want to see the implementation, because enacting a law and implementing are two different things. So we want to see the actualization. We want to see areas where we can enhance transparency. It's actually enhanced, issues to do with your lifestyle audit, asset declaration. So for us, it's like I alluded to, we are still below 50 out of 100. So we still have a lot of work to do. Political will, yes, we've seen political will, but we know more can be done. And what we're saying is, can more be done? Can we strive for excellency even in the fight against corruption? The aim is to attain zero tolerance to corruption. So areas where there's room for improvement, let's ensure that we address those issues.
Finally, what is TIZ's position on the call by stakeholders for the president to declare his assets publicly?
I think for us, our position has always been consistent. Office holders, public officials, people that manage public resources, it's important that they declare their assets publicly. Of course, we're cognizant of the fact that there is no law that mandates the president. For a presidential candidate, yes, when they're standing for elections, and we've heard the Anti-Corruption Commission indicate that the law they're working on a law that will address all these concerns. But what we're saying is, even before the law, I think people in a position of authority can willingly do that. I think this is very important so that people are also aware these are the assets that I own before I got into this office. These are the assets that I'm living with, but it's just not also an element of just declaring. There must be a mechanism of verifying, because people can overstate assets that they don't have, knowing very well that I'm going to accumulate this much when I'm in public office, and when they come to check when I'm leaving, it will tally with what I declared. So the issue of declaration, it's a whole holistic cycle. Yes, you declare. Yes, there's verification. There's also monitoring. But we also want to ensure that the conflict of interest are managed. You're not benefiting because of the position that you hold. In office, you're not doing this transaction to give you an edge. You're not taking advantage of the position that you hold as a public official. So I think the unfortunate thing is there's no law at the moment that compels the president, our Republican president, but would urge him to declare. It would be good, and it will show a certain level of transparency, because I think everyone is interested in knowing the assets of the president. It will be a good benchmark such that even when he's leaving the presidency, people will be able to say, oh, this is what he attained. So I think it's very critical, and we're hopeful that the law that the Anti-Corruption Commission is working on will come into effect before 2026, so that it gives an opportunity for all the office bearers and the public officials to be able to declare their interests, their assets, and their liabilities. I think that would be very helpful.
Transparency International Zambia President, thank you so much for talking to me on this edition of This Day.
Thank you. You're welcome.